if we either bury that emotion and we don't allow it to surface, or if that emotion is just so big that we can't really deal with it, then the energy of that emotion remains in the body.
Welcome to the Food Matters Podcast, your home for health and wellness. My name is James Colquhoun, filmmaker and founder of foodmatters.com, and I am your host on this journey to inner and outer transformation. Hello and welcome to this very special interview and discussion with Bradley Nelson, one of the foremost experts in bioenergetic medicine and understanding the link between your emotions and healing your body. This full-length interview is from our Transcendence docuseries Season 2, which is streaming free and online for a very limited time. All 10 episodes, 2 seasons, September 1 through 10th, 2022. You can find out more by clicking on the link in the show notes. This docuseries will help you to transform your life, your health, your mind, your body, your spirit, help you break through limiting beliefs, help you understand what's keeping you stuck and holding you back, whether that's in your health or your relationships or your business or your life or getting your mission and purpose to the world. And again, we're putting it up free and online as part of an online screening event to share this life-saving message with the world and with you and with your friends and family. So hold a healthy house screening party, get together with friends and family. You probably know some of the experts in this film: Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton, Gabby Bernstein, Marie Forleo, Wim Hof, Novak Djokovic. The list goes on. 47 world-class experts, 10 episodes, 10 days, 2 seasons, September 1 to 10, 2022. You need to register to get a link for when we go live. So make sure to click on the link in the show notes or head to foodmatters.com to find out more about how you can save your spot to this free event. And I hope that you love today's interview, and I can't wait to see you when we open the doors to this screening. Have a beautiful day. Dr. Bradley, pleasure to be speaking with you.
Great to be here.
So everybody has a story when it comes to a catalyst or a beginning or an impetus that sort of set you off on this journey. What was it for you, and can you tell me about that time?
Well, sure. For me, it really started at age 7. I was really sick with the measles, and I had overheard my parents talking about how the next day, the plan was I was going into the hospital and going into something called an oxygen tent, which I didn't really understand, but the tent part of it sounded interesting, but I was too sick to enjoy it. So everyone else had gone to bed. My parents came into the room. They'd made a bed for me upstairs on a couch so I could be near their bedroom. And my mother said to my father, she said, "Honey, will you kneel down with me and say a prayer so that our boy will be able to get well?" So they did. And my father's offering this prayer, this heartfelt prayer for me. And knowing my dad, it was probably the first time in my life that I'd actually heard him pray, out loud. And in the middle of this remarkable thing happened. This change started at the top of my head, and it went whoosh through my body, and I was healed instantly. Now, to go from being really sick one moment, in the next moment to being completely well and totally vibrantly healthy is so bizarre and so remarkable and so unbelievable and so amazing that you don't ever forget it. And every moment of that is still just burned into my mind like it happened yesterday. And I held my tongue until my dad was done praying, which didn't take long. And when he was done, I said, "I'm better. God healed me. I'm better." And they said, "That's fine, honey. Go back to sleep now. Tomorrow you're going to the hospital." But that taught me a very powerful, very profound lesson, and that is that there is a higher power. There's another power out there that we can draw upon. And then that really stayed with me. So fast forward about another 7 years, and I ended up having these terrific pains all of a sudden out of the blue that were in my back. And these pains were so severe they would take my breath away or sometimes just put me on the ground. And my parents were very worried. I was panicked. We went to the hospital. They ran all these tests, and they said I had kidney disease. And it was a serious situation for me. My kidneys were either going to get better or they weren't, and it was about a 50-50 thing. And if they didn't get better, there were no kidney transplants back then, so I was a goner at that point. But there was nothing that they had to offer me medically. And so my parents decided they would take me to see some alternative healers. And so they took me to see some people who worked out on the edge of town in a trailer house that they were actually out in the middle of a wheat field. It was really interesting. An enormous contrast from where I had been. And they started working on me, and in short order, I was feeling dramatically better. And within about a month, I had forgotten I'd ever been sick, and my parents took me back to the hospital. They ran all the tests, and as I recall, they ran the tests twice, and they said, well, it's a spontaneous remission. Whatever we did must have helped. But I knew they hadn't really done anything. These other doctors had helped me. So I decided that's what I wanted to do with my life, was go into the healing arts. And so I did. I got distracted for a number of years, going into business and going into computer programming and so on. But eventually, it was another answer to prayer, a very profound answer that brought me back to that direction. So when I got out of chiropractic school and I went into practice, I decided that God had gotten me into this. And God goes by different names for different people, source energy, creator, whatever. But I thought, that higher power, God's gotten me into this. Maybe now I can get some help because I need help with these people that are coming to me that have all these problems. So I developed this habit. And the habit was that when someone would come in to see me, before I would go to work on them, I would just take a moment and direct my thoughts to heaven and ask God to help me with this person. And it was a totally private, totally personal habit. No one ever knew that I was doing this. It was just a momentary pause, really. But I'll tell you, I practiced for 17 years in a brick and mortar practice and for about 2.5 years in a distance practice. During those years, there were times when people would come in to see me that had conditions going on and problems that were happening for them that I didn't know how to address. And there were times when I would offer that silent prayer and ask for help, when the information would just flood into my body like an avalanche of understanding and data. And sometimes that included ways of looking at things that I had never even considered, that I don't think anybody else had considered before either. And so I know that that higher power, whatever you want to call it, is very real and is aware of what we're doing, I believe, all the time. So that led to little discoveries and gradually over time, learning everything that I could from every source that I could and from ancient texts and whatever other people were doing that seemed to work. I was able to put together this method of working with the emotional baggage that we call now the emotion code. And so I left practice eventually and wrote this book. And now it's coming out again. It's out again now as a hardcover. And it's changing people's lives all over the world. Really exciting.
So paint the picture a little bit more for me when this kidney disease started to happen for you. How old were you? What was your life like? I mean, I'm assuming everything was rosy, and then all of a sudden it was just out of nowhere, and this journey out into this wheat field again.
Well, I grew up in a very idyllic home, I think. My mother and father were childhood sweethearts, and I don't remember them arguing ever. So it was probably very unusual, really. And so there was a lot of love in our home, and it was really a wonderful experience that I had growing up, unlike so many people, unfortunately. But I was 13 years old when I started getting these pains in my back. And at first I was able to ignore them, but then suddenly they reached this just unbelievable crescendo. And when I would get hit with this pain, it would be like I'd been run through with a sword or a telephone pole or something. I mean, it was just unbearable pain, and it would come totally out of the blue. And it was frankly terrifying. And my parents were very concerned about me, and of course we went to the hospital and they ran the tests, and I was diagnosed with kidney disease. And 50% fatal, they said. Nothing that could really be done about it. I was either going to recover or not. And so my mother was very into and very open to alternative types of healing. And so my parents decided they would take me to see these alternative doctors who started to work with me. And what they did was just what I needed, because it didn't take long and I was better.
Was it a Reiki? Was it an energy? Do you remember exactly what the protocol was? Or was there just you went in and it happened? Was it a group prayer? Was it a meditation?
They were osteopathic doctors who, back in the I believe it was in the late 50s or early 1960s, the osteopathic profession was kind of engulfed by the medical profession. And so nowadays, most osteopathic doctors are basically like medical doctors here in the US. But they decided they didn't want any part of that, and so they stayed out of that. And so they had their own practice, and they were kind of on the outside of things. But I can remember many times going to their house and seeing a busload of people drive away that had driven there from some other state. People would organize these bus trips to see them because they were true healers. And so they were doing osteopathic work with me. I thought for years they were chiropractors. They were realigning things in my spine, realigning bones and things, and giving me certain potions and things to drink. But they were true healers.
And you went to the hospital, ran the tests again, and this word you used, spontaneous remission, did you use that, did that come up for you in this particular instance?
Well, as I recall how things went, about a month after I had been diagnosed, I was feeling completely fine, and my parents took me back to the clinic, and the tests were run again. And as I recall, they ran the tests twice, and then I heard those words, well, it's a spontaneous remission, whatever we did must have helped. And I was only 13 years old, but I wasn't stupid. I knew that what these people had done had been what my body needed. Sometimes you just know something in your heart. I knew that what they had done had helped me and was what my body wanted. So I decided at that point that that's what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to go into the healing arts and do what they did.
So studying chiropractic care makes sense because it's affiliated in a way with osteopathic medicine, and that it works with the sort of the energetic and the spinal sort of systems of the body. How did you move from chiropractic care sort of deeper into this emotional? Was there something, because chiropractors are, say 5 different types of people. There's the real manual adjusters, and on the other spectrum, there's the real energy healers. What took you from more of a manual adjustment person into this, like there's something deeper going on in the body?
Well, these 2 osteopathic doctors that I saw, Dr. Ida Harmon and Dr. Alan Bain, I can remember lying on my back on their table, looking up at them saying, when I grow up, I want to do what you do. And they would say to me, no, you don't. They'd say, no, because if you go to school, you'll get your head so full of fixed ideas that when you come out, you won't be able to think for yourself. You won't be an independent thinker. You'll be like a zombie. And that really stuck with me. So when I went to school, I was very much on guard and very on the defensive. And when my instructors would say things like, this is the best way to do this certain thing, my thought would always be, well, maybe that's true, but maybe that isn't. Maybe there's a better way. Maybe there's a faster way. Maybe there's an easier way. So I was always just wide open, radically open to whatever I could learn. So when I got into practice, that stayed with me. And I was obsessed with getting my patients well, because I felt that's why they were coming to me. And so anything that I could find that might help them, I was open to doing. And I was open to using new methods or different methods or things that might be frowned upon or things that might be brand new or things that maybe no one else had thought of. And so really, I think that during those years, the most important piece of that puzzle to me was this connection that I was making with each person. So really all day long, I was kind of in a state of prayer because I'm asking for help with this person and then asking for help with the next person. And so I think that was a really powerful aspect of this. And I believe now that I've been given this mission to take this to the world. In fact, let me share something. I had gotten involved in computers and computer programming and was really into that. And I was about 6 months away from going into the MBA program at Brigham Young University in Utah. And we went home, my wife and I went home to Montana where my parents were living, where I'd grown up. And we were sitting around with my parents talking. And it was Christmas time. And my father, totally out of the blue, said, "Are you sure that you don't want to go to chiropractic school? It seems like a great career and you've always wanted to do it." And I said, no, I'm going this other direction. And he said, well, why don't you think about it one more time? So I thought, okay. So I did. And my wife and I made up a pro and con list, and we still didn't know what to do. And now all of a sudden, I thought I had my life figured out. And now all of a sudden, I'm kind of back to this old dream of going into the healing arts. And now I'm right in the middle of the fence. So that night I got on my knees and I prayed and I asked God to help me to know if if he had anything to say about this. I was open to whatever. And so that night I had this dream, right? 3 times. Well, it wasn't really a dream. I was awakened 3 different times to find my mind full of these warm, happy thoughts about how great it is to be able to heal people naturally and help people naturally and serve mankind and so on. And I would think, well, yeah, that's true, but computers, and I'd fall back asleep. That happened 3 times that night. So the next night I'm on my knees again and being kind of slow. And I'm asking again, Father, help me to know what to do. I'm open. And I had the same experience that night, but this time, each time it was geometrically, exponentially more powerful than the time before. So on the 3rd time, on the 2nd night when I was awakened, I can't describe how powerful this was, but I mean the thoughts of service to mankind and the planet, all of humanity, was just absolutely overwhelming. And right then I actually heard a voice that spoke to me as clearly as I'm speaking to you right now, and it said, "This is a sacred calling." Those were the words. And I thought, okay, I get it. That's it. And so I followed that. And I didn't really understand, what that meant. But, years later, I had this experience where I think we've all probably heard at some point in our lives that the body is like a temple somehow, right? We've heard that. I think that's probably in every religion on the planet. And I had heard that before, but one day I had this little routine that I mentioned where I have a patient that comes in. My patient is lying face down on this table. Before I go to work on this patient, I take a moment and I just connect with the higher power and ask for help. So this one particular day, I have a patient in there and I ask for help, and all of a sudden I have this incredibly powerful experience where it was as if my eyes suddenly were open for the first time in my whole life, and I saw and understood with spiritual eyes that I was standing in the presence of this sacred temple, the temple of the body. And it was absolutely just an incredible experience. And I was just instantly filled with the deepest sense of reverence and awe to be standing in the presence of this sacred edifice, the body temple. Now, this only lasted for probably 4 or 5 seconds. And then that window sort of closed, but it stayed with me all this time. And so it gave me a different understanding of what that sacred calling, what that meant. Because when we're working with the body in any way, any kind of capacity, when we're helping people to feel better, if we're a medical doctor and we're sewing people up, or if we're a chiropractor, we're realigning things, or if you're releasing emotional baggage, whatever it is, what you're doing is a sacred thing because the body itself is sacred. And this is an understanding that the ancients had that we've lost, for the most part.
That's true, and I think that ancient language, ancient religions talk about this idea of God resides within you as you. And when you say that, to me, that's we've externalized God in so many ways. And when you put it like this, it really brings it back to we are all sort of cut from the same cloth. We're all part of this divine matrix. Your work has ended up sort of zeroing in on emotions. I mean, writing emotion code and having that speciality. What was it that made you really go deep into that particular ideology? Because you could have gone into how toxins affect the body or how electromagnetic fields affect the body, but you focused on, well, in a way, electromagnetic fields, but how emotions are related to the body. What happened there, and what are emotions, and how do they get stored in the body?
Well, how it came about really for me was I was trying to balance the organs and the glands in my patients' bodies. And I found that sometimes I could balance their organs and glands, and because the organs and the glands, for the most part, are connected to certain muscles in the body, people were coming to see me with pain, typically, in various parts of the body. And I found that muscle imbalance was a big reason for that, but that was secondary to the organ or gland imbalance. And I found that sometimes I could balance these organs and glands, and sometimes I couldn't. But then there was a serendipitous thing that happened to me that helped me to realize that emotional baggage is a piece of the puzzle. And I knew about emotional baggage, but I never realized that that emotional baggage could be a big underlying cause of imbalance in the organs and the glands. And so it's a process that I think many people are undergoing all over the world. You know, it's almost like the old story of the people that were sent to, the blind men who were sent to discover what an elephant was. And depending on where the blind man was, he would tell a different story when he came back. Oh, it's like a big snake if he's at the nose. Oh, it's like a big paintbrush if he's at the tail. We're all kind of gradually uncovering this edifice of this incredible body that we live in, and we're starting to understand how the body works and so on. Well, the body itself is energy. And so if you magnify your hand 1,000,000 times or more, eventually you're face to face with an atom, and you realize if you look in the atom, there's really nothing in there, just empty space, right? And some infinitesimally tiny energies that are zipping around at the speed of light, and that's what we are. Well, when you're experiencing emotions, you see, what we believe is that every emotion has its own specific frequency. And if you're feeling an emotion of anger, for example, that's a different frequency or a different vibration than an emotion of sadness, and that's different from frustration. They're all different. But if you're feeling an emotion that's powerful enough, your whole being can take on this vibration. And in those circumstances, what can happen is the energy of that emotion can become just too much for the body to take. And so some of that energy remains behind. There's a process that we go through when we experience emotions. The emotion is generated. And by the way, the emotions in the body are generated by the organs and some of the glands. And so, in other words, what's generated is the emotional frequency that we perceive as the emotion. And so, energetically, that's how we look at it. Well, that happens. The emotion is generated. We feel the emotion. We acknowledge it. And then we allow it to dissipate and move on. And that's the process that we are supposed to go through. If that process is interrupted somewhere, if we either bury that emotion and we don't allow it to surface, or if that emotion is just so big that we can't really deal with it, then the energy of that emotion remains in the body. And so then what happens is it may manifest many, many years down the road as all kinds of different problems. The operative word that we use is discomfort. If you have some kind of discomfort, that's probably emotionally based. Now, discomfort can be physical or mental or emotional. Let me share a story with you. There was a man that came in to see me many years ago, and his back pain was really severe. It was a 9 on a 0 to 10 scale, and 10 is call of the emergency, right? And it had been going on for a while, and I tested him and found he had a trapped emotion. The emotion was anger. And using the emotion code, I was able to figure out that it occurred about 20 years before. And he remembered exactly what had gone on, some really difficult, traumatic things at work. And so I released the emotion, which just takes a few seconds, and instantly the pain went from a 9 to a 0. Now, he kept bending over and exclaiming he couldn't believe it was like a miracle. Well, I was grateful that it worked so well. But the interesting thing is, a couple days later, he came back into me and he said, you know, my back is still fine. He said, I still can't believe it. But he said, I had another problem when I came in here that I didn't tell you about. He said, for as long as I can remember, I've basically been a rageaholic. And he said, I'm always yelling at my wife and my kids. I got to watch the road rage. And I've been to anger management several times, hasn't really helped me. But he said, since you released that emotion of anger from me, I feel different. I feel like a new person. I don't feel angry anymore. I'm not on edge anymore. How did that work? And at the time I said, well, I don't know. But what we believe, you see, is that when you have a trapped emotion, you've got this ball of emotional energy from about the size of a baseball to about the size of a softball. And these will lodge in different places in the body. And sometimes where they lodge has a metaphysical significance, and sometimes they will lodge in areas where there's some previous injury or something. And what they will do is they will distort the normal energy field of the body. So when you distort the normal energy field of the body, you're distorting the body itself, because that's all the body is an energy field, right? And so eventually you distort that field long enough, you're interfering with the chemical reactions in that tissue, you're interfering with the blood flow, maybe the lymph flow to some degree, certainly the flow of acupuncture energy in that area. And so when we release that emotional energy, suddenly things change and discomfort can go away. Well, in this guy's case, think about this. He had this ball of anger in his back. After 20 years, it was causing him excruciating pain. But there was something else going on that emotion, that anger, it's a frequency, it's a vibration. So his body was feeling that emotion 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So when a situation would come along in his life where he might tend to feel the emotion of anger, he would slide right into that resonance much more easily, much more readily than he otherwise would. Why? Because literally part of his body was feeling that emotion constantly. And so getting rid of it made an immediate change, not only physically, but also mentally and emotionally. So if you think about it, we all have emotional baggage, and getting rid of that baggage is a tremendously powerful key to becoming who you're supposed to be, to getting back to the you that you are intended to be. And that's really exciting to me.
Amazing, beautiful. And it seems that we're ripe for this information now because we're becoming more aware in the circles probably that we operate in, especially, that there is an attention that needs to be paid to the emotional sensitivity of the human frame. And yet culturally we still have this conditioning that teaches us to suppress emotions, to hold things back, especially in the masculine sort of side of humanity. Tell me about how we've been taught to suppress emotions, and also maybe talk to me a little bit about what are the main types of energetic blockages that you see presented in your work and your practice and everything you've done. Like, what would be common feelings or emotions or symptoms that people might be experiencing that, listening to this, they might think, I need to work on that?
Right. Well, yes, it's true. As men, especially in the West, we're taught to suppress our emotions. Boys don't cry. Men especially don't cry. We're taught that emotions and showing emotion is a sign of weakness. And so we tend to suppress those emotions. And as a result, women are much more likely to seek help for emotional difficulties, while men are much less likely. And so as a result, men tend to have more problems, more diseases and so on in certain categories. What I have seen personally with emotional baggage is that they seem to be the biggest single underlying cause of depression and anxiety and phobias and panic attacks and PTSD and eating disorders and self-sabotage of all kinds. And they also are the biggest underlying cause of the physical pain that people experience. Neck pain, migraine, headaches, low back pain, knee pain, but other problems too. People seek medical help for many other kinds of conditions. And in my experience over the last 30 years, every single one of those conditions, things like infertility and asthma and digestive disorders, and even cancer, all of those diseases, in my experience, always have an underlying emotional component. And my hope and my dream is that as more time goes on, eventually Western medicine will recognize this. I think it's going to be inevitable. We just recently finished a study where we found that we got a 36% increase or decrease in PTSD symptoms, and about a 35% decrease in depression symptoms within about a 3-week span of using the emotion code, and specifically releasing the emotions that cluster around the heart, that we refer to as a heart wall.
Are you suffering from gut issues, an autoimmune condition, chronic pain, imbalanced hormones, and you just can't seem to find a solution? Well, you're not alone. If you're listening to this podcast, you likely value your health, your well-being, energy, and vitality. And at Food Matters, we believe that your body is worthy of good care and that there's nobody more suitably qualified to care for it than yourself, which is why we have created the Food Matters Nutrition Certification Program. This program is designed to improve and increase your knowledge when it comes to important topics around the gut, autoimmune conditions, balancing hormones, detoxification. Plus, it really has helped me cut through the confusion about what to eat and avoid when there's so many different dietary philosophies out there, from veganism to paleo to plant-based to whole foods to wild foods to qualitarian, who knows these days. We have assembled some of the brightest minds in nutrition and natural healing including experts like David Wolfe, Dr. Livy Weaver, Mark Hyman, Dr. Alejandro Junger, and so many more. To find out more about how you can join us on this program and become a certified nutrition coach to help heal yourself, your loved ones, or even help take this message to more people by working with people one-on-one or starting your own wellness business, you can find out more at foodmatters.com/study. Again, that's foodmatters.com/study. Through heart math, we're learning that the heart can emit an energy that we can sort of communicate in this unspoken language of energetics. And I feel that in the sort of the work that I'm involved with and the hundreds of people I've interviewed over the last 10 years, that this self-doubt, lack of self-love, lack of self-worth is a big problem. And as people get older, they start to sort of enter a process of clearing out energies, clearing out old sort of energetic baggage, as you talk about, or emotional baggage. And a lot of people find that it's related to their childhood. Maybe they had a traumatic childhood, or they were neglected, or they were abused, and then later on in life they have these emotions come up. Maybe they're approaching midlife and like, what's going on with me? And then they go, well, maybe it's related to back then. Do you find that certain childhood traumas or childhood experiences can cause emotional baggage to be stored in the body and result in this negative self-talk and negative self-love?
Well, yes, absolutely. The experiences that we go through as a child can definitely have tremendous impact because, of course, we look at, for example, our parents as gods, right? And when we're abused by our parents, or we're talked down to by our parents, or we're told we're never going to amount to anything by our parents, it's very likely that that's going to get incorporated in a very powerful way. It's so important for us to be careful with the words that we say, especially to children, because they're just open books and just sponges. And so it's so important to be very aware of what we say. Sometimes we might say something in jest to a child that can just go right to the core of that child and can really affect them. So the words that we say are so important. And the emotional baggage that we pick up as kids definitely has huge effects on us, oftentimes years down the road. And not only as far as how we feel about ourselves, and how we interact with others and how we perceive the world, but also, again, in physical symptoms and also in emotional, mental symptoms. There was a young woman that came to an event once that I was teaching, and she came up out of the audience. I asked for a volunteer, and she came up out of the audience, and I started doing some testing with her and asking if she had a trapped emotion that we could release. And the answer that I got was yes, and she was holding out her outstretched arm, and I'm asking questions and then pressing on her arm. And if it's strong, the answer is yes. And if it's weak, the answer is no. And we found that she had a trapped emotion of forlorn, which is kind of feeling all alone, hopeless, desolate, lonely. It occurred when she was in the first year of her life. So I said, do you know anything about this? And of course, she didn't have any remembrance of it. But I'd happened to meet this young girl and her mother at the beginning of this event. And I looked out at the audience, and there's her mother, and she's as white as a sheet. She's got her hands up like this, and I said, hey, do you have any idea what this is about? And she said that she was very embarrassed, but she said she thought maybe she did. She said that back in those years, she used to use cloth diapers, and one day she accidentally pinned her daughter to her diaper. And she didn't know about it until she changed her the next time. And she was horrified to find out that she'd done this, and she had never told her daughter until that moment. She put it behind her. Well, the interesting thing was, here's this poor little baby feeling this emotion of forlorn. No one's helping me. I'm crying and crying and crying, and I'm in terrible pain. Someone come help me, and nobody did. And so she develops this trapped emotion of forlorn, right? So we released the emotion, and she went back and sat down. And I didn't think anything else about it. In fact, I kind of forgot about it. And about 10 days later, I get an email from this young girl's mother, and she said, listen, my daughter's had this problem with her hip and her knee. It's been getting gradually worse for a number of years. And we've taken her to different people. Nobody's been able to really figure this out. But she said, the moment you release that emotion of forlorn, that has been gone. And I waited 10 days to see if it was real, if it was going to come back. It hasn't come back. And she said, not only that, She said, my daughter, it was affecting the way that she was walking, and she's walking better now, but she said she also feels this new lightness of being that she's never felt before. And she's telling everyone about this. So you see, the emotion code can tap into these unconscious memories that we have, and it can find those and find emotional baggage that you don't know anything about consciously. In fact, sometimes we pick up emotional baggage in the womb from what's going on with mom or dad or the family. Sometimes we pick up emotional baggage at the moment of conception, we find, that's passed from a parent, that they might have gotten from a parent, that sometimes these will go back for many generations, and you can find those and get rid of those too.
You're walking us into the subconscious here. There's people that have helped to sort of pioneer this understanding, including yourself, that we are heavily conditioned during this early stage of life. What is your understanding of how, the role that the subconscious plays in this emotional story, and how would you explain that to the layperson?
Well, if you think about it, we have this conscious mind, which is where we spend all of our waking hours, right? The subconscious mind is the other part of us, this vastly intelligent part of us that is so smart that it can take the sandwich you had for lunch and can convert some of that over into new cardiac muscle tissue or new nerve cells. I mean, it's a level of intelligence beyond our ability to really comprehend at this point where we are. So the conscious mind is a tiny, tiny part of your total intelligence. Now, they say that a single cell in the body is equivalent in complexity to a full-size aircraft carrier with thousands of people working on board at their different jobs, with jets on the ramp, with their engines spooled up, ready to take off. That's a single cell. And the last estimate was that the average adult has about 137 trillion of those. Let me tell you something. Your subconscious mind is aware of every single one of those, down to the DNA level, down to the quantum level, and so every face you've ever seen in a crowd, everything you've ever eaten or tasted or touched or smelled, the whole history of your health or disease, it's all in there in that subconscious mind. So consciously, we are barely functional, I think. We like to think of ourselves as really smart, but the subconscious mind puts us all to shame because it is so intelligent. So what we have learned to do, and the emotion code and the body code, all the work that we do, is based on this understanding that we can ask questions of the subconscious and we can get answers. Now, the problem is, you see, the conscious mind and the subconscious mind need to agree on certain things. For example, let's say that you would like to become wealthy, all right? Well, that's fine. Consciously, you want to become wealthy, and so you want to move in that direction. But if your subconscious mind has learned from the things that have come in as inputs that it's not okay for you to be wealthy, what will happen is the subconscious mind will prevent that. Or you may become wealthy and then lose that wealth and have to regain it over and over. And this applies to everything. Let's say, for example, that subconsciously, we actually had this case once where there was a woman who was trying to lose weight. She was very overweight. And what had happened was, we finally were able to understand, was that she had seen what happened with her mother. Her mother, when she was a child, was overweight, went on a diet, lost the weight, promptly had an affair, and destroyed the family, ended up in divorce, terribly painful. So here's this child now who's in her 40s and 50s, trying to lose weight and can't, because the subconscious mind has this idea that if we lose weight, we'll have an affair, and our marriage will end, and that'll be the end of it. And so she was never able to get to that point, you see. And so that emotional baggage will run us. And I'll tell you something, the future, I believe, of human development and human progress is to understand that if you can line up the conscious mind and what your goals and desires are with the subconscious mind, when you can line those two up, by getting rid, generally, of the emotional baggage in the subconscious, when you can line up the subconscious with the conscious, then things can really happen for you, you see. And so far, we've really mainly been working with the conscious mind. You know, you think about all the people all of us, we've all done this. We all buy tapes and tapes, I'm dating myself. But we all listen to things and watch videos, and we try to progress and make our life work as well as we can with the conscious mind. But if your conscious mind is opposed to that, then no matter what you do, it's not going to work out. And I'll tell you something else. If your subconscious mind is okay with you being sick, or is okay with you having some kind of a disease, or is okay with you being depressed and so on, it's going to be hard for you to get well until you start getting rid of that baggage.
Wow, this is huge. And we think of the subconscious mind as like the limbic brain, right? Just back here, and this is the conscious brain. But how you described it to me is that the subconscious is everywhere. Yeah. Can you explain that? Because this we're taught this sort of theory, right? Right. Conscious brain, subconscious brain, or it's the little almond, or it's the little this, or it's the limbic brain. But you're sort of giving a much more expansive idea of the subconscious.
Yeah. Well, I believe that our entire body is intelligent. Okay, we have this analog sort of computer with our physical brain, and we do our best to get through life using this brain. But the great secret, I believe, is that the seat of the subconscious mind is really the heart. Back in the 1960s, doctors first started doing heart transplants. And it didn't take long before people would come back and say things like, gee, my taste in music or food or sports has totally changed. Or they'd have memories sometimes of places that they'd never in their lives visited. Sometimes their handwriting would have totally changed. And in every case, when they were connected with the family of the heart donor, they would find out, oh my gosh, yes, that's our son's handwriting that you have now. How bizarre is that? Or yes, our daughter was a concert violinist. That must be why those passages of yours you keep playing over and over. Those were her favorite passages. How strange is that? And the memories of the places that you've been, yes, our son had been to those places on his motorcycle trips, and now you have those memories. How bizarre is that? Well, you see, the ancients believed that the heart was the seat of the soul, the source of love and creativity and romance, and really the core of our being. And in the West, we've never really given any of those ideas any credence because, of course, they didn't have the kind of equipment that we have now. We know the heart is just a pump. That's all it is. But of course, now, thanks to heart math and some other people that are doing this kind of work, we're finding out that the heart really is a second brain. And of course, it puts out this energy field. And when you're feeling love or affection for another person, your heart rates will synchronize and your heartbeat will become measurable in their brain waves and so on. So there is this incredible aspect to us that we've been unaware of. Now, what we have found is that when you feel like your heart is going to break, when your heart is under assault, really, when you're feeling deeply hurt or deeply grieved about something, it becomes a physical sensation. And that's where that word heartache comes from, right? Most people have felt this at one time or another. You feel like there's an elephant sitting on your chest, or you're choking like you can't breathe. Well, when that's going on, your subconscious mind itself is under attack, I believe. And so the subconscious will put up a wall around that heart to protect that heart, that core of your being, from being broken. And that wall is made from layers of your emotional baggage, your trapped emotions, literally. And so when you have this kind of wall going on, it makes it much more difficult for you to connect with other people. It makes it more difficult for you to feel, because this is the brain that feels, you see. This brain feels nothing. And that's why here we are in the 21st century, and we're still thinking that using war to settle differences between nations is perfectly acceptable, right? And you'd think we would have progressed beyond that. But it's because people in power, along with most people, are using this brain, which feels nothing, right? This brain is where we feel. And so a secret to transforming this planet, I believe, is to get rid of enough of these walls. When those walls are taken down, it's not unusual for people to fall in love, who never ever thought they would, even at advanced ages. It's not unusual for creative ideas to start to flow spontaneously. And I'll tell you, the best ideas you'll ever have will be the ideas that come from this brain, not this brain, see? So when people tell you you should follow your heart, they're right, you should. But what if you have a heart wall? Because 93% of people have this wall that they've put up. And so it blocks them. So getting rid of that wall is so important. And that's really the most important part of the emotion code. And the instructions are all in there in the book, how to do this. But I'll share one story with you about this. There was a woman who came in to see me. She had neck pain, and she'd been to a couple of other doctors that hadn't been able to help her. So she came in to see me, and as I was talking with her, she told me that she was single. And she had been single for 8 years. She hadn't dated in 8 years, and she was never going to date again. She was going to die single, and she was dead serious. And I said, gee, why do you feel this way? She told me that 8 years before, she was really deeply in love with this guy who dumped her and broke her heart. And that was it, no more dating. Well, she was only 38 years old. She was an attractive woman. She was a nurse. And so I started checking her, and I found she had put up this wall around her heart. And there were 3 layers of this wall. And each one of those layers was an emotion that had gotten stuck in her body from the breakup 8 years before. So I cleared those 3 emotions, and suddenly when I got done, not only was the heart wall gone, this invisible energy wall around her heart was gone, but also her neck pain was suddenly just completely gone. And so she left the office feeling totally fine. I didn't see her again for 3 months, and when she came back in, I'll always remember this. I looked at her and I said, hey, I haven't seen you for a while. How are you? She said, my neck has been fine since I was here. But she said, you released that heart wall for me, and that really works because, she said, about 2 weeks after I was here, I found out my childhood sweetheart has been living right around the corner from me for almost 8 years. And we're dating and we're in love. And I think he's going to ask me to marry him. And I just thought, wow, what a shift.
Unbelievable. So how can people develop an awareness that they might have something that's holding them back?
Well, first of all, I would say that if you haven't had any of your emotional baggage removed, then you definitely have things holding you back, because this phenomenon of trapped emotions is really universal. If you're having any kind of discomfort, that's a sign of emotional baggage. If you're having physical discomfort in some way, there's something that doesn't feel right in your body, 99 times out of 100, there will be some emotional baggage there. If you're feeling some kind of emotional or mental discomfort in some way, if your life isn't working like it should, if you keep picking the wrong kind of person as a mate over and over and you can't figure out why, if you tend to feel certain emotions that you don't really understand, you're not sure where they're coming from, if some things easily trigger you, okay, and you can become upset at the drop of a hat, or you find yourself crying for no reason, or if you are not able to keep enough money in your bank account, or if you just can't seem to find love and you're alone, those are all signs of emotional baggage. I've come to the conclusion that our emotional baggage is the single biggest common denominator for us as human beings, for all the trouble that we suffer from, all the suffering that we have. And in fact, one of the interesting things about this is you can say the same thing about animals, because animals also develop trapped emotions. And it's the biggest single underlying cause of their behavioral and physical difficulties as well.
Especially our closest domesticated friends, like dogs. I mean, you pick up a pound dog and you can't pat it, it's had some form of abuse, right?
Absolutely.
So this is probably a little bit more philosophical then. If our emotions are causing us so much discomfort, causing us to be sort of walled off from achieving our highest potential, is there purpose to make us suffer? Like, I believe in the spiritual ideology of that everything is unfolding perfectly, that there's some sort of perfection seeking to emerge through any situation, whether it's a pain or a disease, it's causing us to adjust, to shift. What is your belief around why these emotions are causing so much suffering in our life, and what are they there to show us?
Well, they're there really to teach us. When you feel an emotion, when something happens to you and you feel an emotion coming up, that's really a message from your deep subconscious. Now, that message that's coming up is happening not only because of what's going on in the moment, but it's also coming up because of past experience. And it may not even be your past experience. It may be the past experience of an ancestor 5 or 6 or 10 generations ago or more, and because of what they went through. And so when we experience this kind of discomfort in our lives, it's a great teacher for us, because it enables us, you see, to eventually realize that the body is talking to us. Our bodies talk to us. And the language of the body is these kinds of things. The language of the body is discomfort in some way, but it may not necessarily be physical. It could be mental, emotional, etc., like we've talked about. Anytime you have anytime you're having any kind of a symptom in your life, there's usually an emotional cause that's underlying that, and that's how the body speaks to you. And if the emotion is big enough, and if you ignore it long enough, it can become a life-threatening problem for you that you may be diagnosed with, and your doctors won't have any idea why you're manifesting this life-threatening disease, and neither will you consciously. But if you can just tap into the subconscious mind, you see it has a perfect understanding of why you're manifesting whatever it is. And you can ask questions, and you can get answers, and most of the time, things can improve, and you learn that lesson, and then you move on. But I totally agree with you that it's really all perfect, and we're all moving towards higher levels, hopefully, and we're growing, and we're progressing. And that's, I think, what life is about. It's about learning. It's about learning how to be happy and have joy in spite of what's going on around us. And I think a key to that, just as an aside, I think that a key to that is learning to have gratitude no matter what happens, even if things are going wrong. If you can learn to have gratitude and look for the good in that thing, you'll probably find that there are some hidden blessings in there that you hadn't thought of. And gratitude and joy are very, very similar vibrations. They're very close to each other. And I think that the purpose of our life, one of the purposes, is to learn how to live in a state of joy. And I think the key really is gratitude. So
beautiful. You're skilled at being able to help identify what these walls might be. And when you talk about identifying emotions, I feel like you're talking about hypnosis, or being able to speak to the subconscious, or being able to do this. How can people tap into identifying their own trapped emotions, or do they need a facilitator? And what's the process of really identifying and then also releasing these emotions? I know that you do different practices, but how can, if someone's on their own and they're like, well, I think I've got an emotional issue, how can they discover that, and then how can they clear that emotion?
Well, the emotion code process is actually really simple. And what I can do with your viewers is I can walk them through something that we call the sway test. There are a number of different methods of getting answers from the subconscious mind. They all have to do with how balanced and how strong or weak the muscles in the body are. So for example, one of the methods that we use is called the ring and ring test. And you just make a ring and a ring, and as you ask questions, your body will tend to stay stronger for yes, and the rings will tend to stay together, or the rings might tend to break if the answer is no. Because what we have found is that the subconscious mind has an effect on the physical body. The subconscious mind has an effect on the physical body such that if the subconscious mind is manifesting a no answer, your body will be a little bit weaker. And so you can pick up that change through various methods of muscle testing. But there's another method that we call the sway test that I can share. So here's how this works. It works best if you're standing. So if you just stand up and close your eyes, drop your hands down to your sides, and just try to relax there for a moment. If you think about something that is true or positive or congruent, you'll tend to sway. The body will tend to sway forward after a few seconds. If you're thinking about something that is not true, something that's false or negative or incongruent, your body will tend to sway backwards. And this is seen in plants as well, where, for example, if you put a plant in a pot and you put it near a window, it will grow towards the light coming in from the window, which it needs. But if you put a plant in a room that has uniform lighting all around, and you put a speaker in the room that's playing beautiful, soothing, classical music and lullabies, the plant will grow towards the speaker playing the music. On the other hand, if that speaker is blaring harsh, grating sounds and annoying kinds of music, the plant will grow away from the speaker. And that's like the sway test. So as you're standing there with your eyes closed, arms down by your sides, totally relaxed, we'll start with something negative. Think about the word war. We hear that word every day. It's in the papers all the time. All of our lives we've heard this word. But imagine for a moment that you're trying to explain to someone on a human level what really goes on in war. What's happening? What are What are young men doing to other young men? What's happening to young men and young women and families and children? What's going on in wars? Think about that for a moment. What is really happening? If you were involved in a war, what would that be like? What are things that you would be expected to do to other people? What would that be like? As you're thinking about that, the moment your subconscious mind makes a connection with what your conscious mind is thinking, at that moment, your body will start to sway backward, trying to move you away from the sheer negativity of that thought of war. Now, let's shift gears and go to something positive. Imagine now that as you're standing there, eyes closed, hands down by your sides, totally relaxed, imagine that 1,000 years have gone by. We're 1,000 years in the future. You're still alive, but you're a different person than you used to be because you're capable now of giving and receiving pure unconditional love. Imagine now that you're bathed in this field of unconditional love, but not only that, you've changed because you're capable and full of unconditional love for all creation, for every creature, for the whole universe. And imagine that the love that fills your heart is so big that your heart can't even contain that love, and that love expands out from you and fills the immensity of space. Imagine what it would be like to be a being capable of that kind of love on that order. Now, as you're thinking about that, and what that would be like when your subconscious mind connects with what your conscious mind is thinking, your body will start to sway forward because it wants to move towards that kind of state, you see, that state of being. And a lot of your watchers I know are right on their tiptoes with that because that's a real thing. And I believe it's something that we're capable of, you see, as time goes on, because we're eternal beings. We have no beginning. I believe we'll have no end. This is just a phase we're passing through to learn some things. And so that's the sway test. Now you can also use the sway test and you can ask questions. Like, for example, as you're standing there totally relaxed, arms down by your sides, eyes closed, you could ask yourself a question like, do I have a trapped emotion? And as you think about that thought, do I have a trapped emotion? Do I have a trapped emotion? If you do, your body will start to sway forward for yes. And if you don't, your body will start to sway backward for no. But if you don't, it's probably because you have a heart wall and that's really blocking things. So you can also ask, do I have a heart wall? And your body will go forward or back. Getting rid of that heart wall, I believe, is about the most important thing that you can do for yourself. It's not unusual at all for people's lives to change in dramatic ways when that wall's taken down.
Do we put up heart walls to protect ourselves? I mean, every emotional response in our lives is a response to save ourselves in a way. Yeah. And so we must hold on to them with vigor. We don't want to let go of them because we're scared that if we do, we might suffer.
The heart wall, we believe, is always put up in response to the heart being under attack or under assault. And so it's there as a protective mechanism. In the same way that if the bombs are falling, you might want to move down into the bunker for a while until the bombs stop falling. But the problem is when the bombs stop falling, when the divorce is over or the bully moves away or you quit that job and get a better one, the problem is that your heart is still inside this bunker. And so to get the heart out of the bunker, the only way that we know of is to actually identify those emotional layers one at a time and release those. And so to continue with what we were talking about before, the process is we have a chart of emotions. There are 60 emotions on this chart. It's divided into 2 columns and 6 rows. And so once you're able in some way to get yes or no answers from the subconscious mind with the sway test or some other method, then you simply ask, do I have a heart wall? And if the subconscious mind says yes, then you ask, can I release an emotion from the heart wall now? And we ask this question because sometimes some people need to keep the wall for a while. But in my own experience, I've never seen the subconscious mind want to keep that wall for more than about a week, because sometimes the subconscious mind will say, no, I need this wall. But then as the mind weighs things, it finally realizes, I really do need to get rid of this because it's interfering with my ability to really experience life fully. And so then you can identify in the same way, getting yes and no answers, you identify the emotion. Is this emotion in column A or column B? One of those will be strong. And then is it in one of the odd rows or an even row? One of those will be strong. And that'll take you to a cell with 5 emotions. And then you just ask, well, is it pride or shame or shock or unworthy or worthless? And one of those will be strong. Unless the emotion is inherited, and then those will probably all be weak, which is the signal that you need to go to the inherited realm, and that's where it came from.
And is it inherited via lineage, or is it inherited via a soul incarnation, or is it inherited, or all of the above? Because we can understand with some consistency that if there's been a lot of trauma or pain or struggle in the early parts of your life and your father's life or your mother's life and your father's father, then that can make sense. But do you also consider these other esoteric forms of imprinting?
Well, what we find in our testing is that we do inherit emotional energies from a parent, and those, according to the testing, those come at conception. So when we're conceived, those are passed from mom or dad. And sometimes these can go back for many generations. And science is now bearing this out, right? Where they excuse me. For example, they're finding that the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors have radically different markers for aging and are much more susceptible to stress. Their DNA changes, and the hormones for aging are markedly elevated in the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. Now, medicine's trying to understand how this happens, but in the emotion code, we know how it happens because the emotional energy is passed down and it can be released. And that energy also, we find, releases not only from the living human being that it's released from, or animal, they inherit sometimes as well, but also those energies release from the parent and the grandparent and the great-grandparent, all the way back. And we've seen this happen. In fact, I'll share a story with you, and then I'll try to answer some of the other questions. I was at an event once, and there was a woman who came up out of the audience. I asked for a volunteer who was in pain, and this woman came up. She limped up from the audience up onto the stage. She had a hip problem, and it was a 9 on a 0 to 10 scale. It had been going on for about a year. She'd seen a couple of other doctors for it, but she hadn't been able to get any help. And it was so bad, she'd have to literally lift her leg with her hands to get in and out of her car. It was really bad. So I found an imbalance and released it, and it took her pain from a 9 to a 4. And then the next thing that I found was that she had an inherited trapped emotion. And the inherited trapped emotion she'd gotten from her father. The emotion was fear, as I recall. He'd gotten it from his father, and he'd gotten it from his father. Now, the subconscious mind, this woman's subconscious mind knew where this had come from. And so I'm just asking questions and getting answers from her subconscious, yes, no, yes, no. And it went back 12 generations. Now, one of the things that's funny about this is that we have found that in these cases, those ancestors will actually appear. Every time I've ever tested this, they always seem to show up. They don't appear so that people can see them. I've never seen one. But they show up so that if I ask the person on the muscle test, are all of these ancestors here in this room? The answer is always yes. And I'll ask, well, are they out in the audience? No. Are they floating in the air? No. Are they standing on the stage with us? Yes, every single time. I've done this all over the world, right? And so they were there, and there wasn't anything else we needed to know. But think about this. Why would they show up? Because you see, in quantum physics, one energy can be shared in an infinite number of places. It can appear in the same place simultaneously to an infinite number. And so when a trapped emotion is shared, that emotional energy is not duplicated, it's just shared in this strange quantum physics kind of way. So all those ancestors had this energy. They were there because it was about to be removed from them. And some of them have been dead for a long time, right? So anyway, I released that trapped emotion, and the pain instantly went to a 0. And she's dancing around on the stage, I mean literally dancing around. It's gone. And she went back and sat down in the audience, and I finished my lecture. And when I went back to our booth, when I was done, about a minute after that, a woman came up to the booth, and here's what she said to me. She said, Dr. Nelson, she said, I want you to know something. She said, I am one of those people who have that gift to be able to see these spirits that other people don't see. And she said, it's kind of been a blessing and it's kind of been a curse, but she said, I wanted you to know something. She said, when you were talking about those ancestors of hers, all those grandfathers, all the way back, she said, I wanted you to know that I saw them all, just like you said. They were all there, just like you described. But she said there was something else going on that I'm not sure you were aware of. She said what I saw was surrounding the stage were at least 200 spirits. And I knew who they were. They were this woman's unborn descendants. And they were there rejoicing that they were not going to have to take on this woman's crippling emotional baggage.
Whoa. Wow.
Yeah.
It takes a small journey into this esoteric sort of pool of knowledge to start to understand that when we delve into the subconscious through hypnosis, there's this recollection of soul journeys and soul planes and incarnations, which is impossible to ignore now. And so I can definitely see that there's some incredible work to be done on this plane.
Oh, it's really interesting. And one of the most profound experiences that I had in my life with healing was, it was 2 years after the Emotion Code book came out, and I asked my daughter Natalie to work on me. And she was in Seattle, and I was near Las Vegas. But this work is done at a distance. So she's working on me. We're not on the phone or anything. She finds I have this inherited trapped emotion of hopelessness. And when she finds that, she starts to feel emotional herself about this. And she finds out through testing that I got this from my father. He got it from his mother. She got it from her mother. It goes back 22 generations to probably the 1400s. And all of a sudden, my daughter can feel the presence of this woman, this grandmother that this began with. She can feel her standing right next to her. Not in a spooky or a creepy kind of way, but just she was there. And my daughter could feel this woman's emotions, this grandmother. She could feel how desperate she was to have this emotional energy released from her posterity. And she could also feel how overwhelmed with gratitude this woman was that this was being done. Now, when that was released, my daughter could feel it ripple through all those generations. And I had this experience where all of a sudden, this background music of hopelessness that had been playing in my life, every waking moment of my life, was suddenly gone. And I never even knew that it was there until the moment that it was gone. And then the silence was deafening. And I realized, my gosh, I've had that all my life. And it was an antique. It was ancient. It was from that grandmother all those generations ago. So you think about, you see, we're a product not only of our own emotional baggage, from our own life that we've lived since we were born or since we were conceived, but also we have this inherited energy that we often receive. We all have it. And you think about it, I mean, some of our ancestors went through the pogroms, or they went through all kinds of wars, or who knows? I mean, you go back 500 or 600 years, life was difficult at best for everybody. So we have that baggage. And we also sometimes come into this world and are conceived with other baggage. And I'll tell you what we are finding. This is really interesting. But the subconscious mind knows these answers, of course. And what we're finding is it appears that every single person who's walking around on this earth has been here before as a person without a physical body, but as an angel on assignment to guide and help someone else, probably one of their connections, a family member, through this life. And so sometimes when you're in that state and you're living really as a guardian angel to a person who's going through mortality, you might experience emotional intensity that you may now then take with you, and maybe hundreds of years later you're actually born yourself, and then you wonder why certain things cause you to feel certain emotions, or it's really interesting.
Wowzers. Let's move a little bit more to present day. We're here. What other practices can people do, as we come to wrapping up here, what other practices can people do on a regular basis to be attentive to their emotions, to soothe their emotions? I don't know, is it hot baths, meditation? What practices are there separate that you recommend to people?
Well, meditation, of course, is wonderful. And I'm always reminded of Wayne Dyer, who was at one point told by a guru, "You need to meditate, Wayne." And he said, yeah, tell me something else. But meditation is important. It's also important to realize that we choose our emotions. That our emotions that come up for us are messengers from the subconscious, but that we also have the opportunity to experience whatever's coming up, but then change that into a different emotion, a positive emotion. And then there's a whole palette of positive emotions that we can choose from, right? So that's important. I think that forgiveness is critically important, and we often forget about forgiveness, but I think that you can't really have peace in your life if there's someone that you have not forgiven, because it creates an energy blockage, you see. And so energy can't flow if you're stopping that forgiveness. Now, it may be that you need to forgive yourself for something. I mean, we all do stupid things. But forgiveness is possible. And one of the things we found is that sometimes people who cannot forgive someone who's really wronged them find that when they remove the emotional baggage around the event or around the person, they are able to move to that point where they can forgive and move on. And I think it's also important to realize that life is a process. And there was a great guru who escapes me now who once said that in my world, nothing ever goes wrong, right? And I think that it's a great attitude to have, that everything is perfect and everything is unfolding for you as it's supposed to. But what are you supposed to learn from these things that are going on? I used to tell my patients, many of them had been told there was no hope, that their disease was forever. Many of them, if they believed that, it would be hard for them to get well. But I would tell them, look, just because you've been diagnosed with this particular thing, if you have learned what you need to learn from this, and if the higher power is willing, there's no reason why you can't get better. So.
Amazing. One last thing you brought up very briefly in our discussion before we had this interview was the power of language. And I've interviewed a lot of people on the power of language, and there was one particular story that we came across recently about a gentleman who was in a car accident and he nearly died. There was his crushed femur, and it narrowly missed the artery, and he would have bled to death in 55 seconds, smashed his face. I mean, it was really a horrific accident. And he studied then Buddhism and psychology and trying to make peace and amends with this situation. But his story was, I nearly died in a car accident. And it wasn't until 25, 30 years later when he was doing a workshop and someone said, well, you can't nearly be pregnant. You can't nearly have died. You didn't die. So everything you added after there was a car accident was your story, and you became a victim of that story. How do people become aware of how much of a victim they may have become because of their language, and how can they use their language to sort of free themselves, I guess, emotionally from things that could be holding them back?
Well, I think that it takes practice. We are so used to saying things and expressing things in our language that are really often patently ridiculous. Like, for example, a common saying is, he made me so mad, or she made me so upset, or that just made me so angry. It's really silly because nothing has any control over you. You have the ultimate choice, right? And you can choose your emotions. Nobody can make you feel anything that you don't choose to feel, in other words. And I'm always brought back to Viktor Frankl and the experience that he had in the Holocaust as a psychologist, observing people. And he said that in the camps, they all remembered that person who would walk through the hut giving away their last piece of bread. And there weren't very many of those kinds of people, but they remember those people. And he said that what he learned from that is that everything else can be taken away from us, but one thing, and that is our ability to choose our response in any given situation. So I think meditation is important. Thinking about the things that we say, being aware, I think, is really the beginning of it. And language is incredibly powerful, and the things that we say can limit us in dramatic ways, or they can help us to progress in dramatic ways. It depends on how we use the language.
Where do you see the history, we've spoken about the history. Where do you see the future of medicine? Where do you see the future? I mean, I have people around me say, and Laurentine, who wishes she could be here, my wife says, she imagines a medicineless society in the future. How do you see the future of healing, of abundance, of health, And what is your vision, I guess, with your work and mission?
Well, I believe that the world is in this transformational process. To me, the earth is in labor, trying to bring forth a whole new kind of existence where we are living from our hearts and where each person is able to manifest into the world all of their gifts and all of that perfection, that blueprint that is within their heart. And I know that's where we're going. I know that's where we're going to get. We are going to get there. It's going to be a little bit of a struggle because, of course, there are entities and there are governments and there are corporations and so on that have control issues that want to maintain their control at all costs. But I think that Western medicine, with all of its advances, where we are as a civilization right now, is phenomenally good at taking care of acute problems, not so good at taking care of other kinds of problems. But I think that as time is going on, the awareness, it's inevitable that the more organized Western side of healthcare is going to blend, and the two are going to eventually blend together. And I believe that in the future we will have a world where people will receive the best options, that they will really be getting what they really truly need. And there are places like that now in the world where you can go and whatever it is that you need, you'll have a team of people that will look at you and you can get what your body is really desiring. And I think that's the future. So the future is so bright, I think we probably should wear sunglasses, really, most of the time, even indoors.
Any final messages for people in terms of the journey that they're going through? Maybe they've heard about this for the first time, or they're sort of slowly waking up to the message that they might have something to clear or work on, or that there's innate potential within them. What would you say to these people?
Well, I think the first thing is to realize that the body that you're in is really a temple. So take care of it, treat it that way, and look at other people that way too. It can change how you feel. The other thing you need to realize is that you have emotional baggage. Sorry, but you do. And so you need to start getting rid of that baggage. However you want to do it, that's fine. The emotion code is a very simple, easy, rapid, efficient method. And it's important to realize also that the odds are very high that you have put up a wall around your heart. And so you're living very likely with a heart that is in a bunker. It makes it much more difficult for you to find love and stay in love and give and receive love. It'll make it easier for you to feel negative emotions, harder to feel positive emotions. You need to get rid of that wall. And by doing that, you're going to be not only changing your own life, but changing the lives of those around you. And you're also going to help the earth in its labor process to give birth to this new world that we're trying to get to.
Beautiful analogy. Amazing. You're an enlightened being. You have a special message for the world. And I think it's incredible that you answered that calling and took that step to be a guide for people and to support them in their emotional liberation. Thank you so much for your time.
You're so welcome.
For everything that we've mentioned in today's episode, you can check out the show notes. There will be links and information there for you. And before I go, I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to invest in yourself and be here for this podcast. If there's anybody that you can think of who could benefit from this information, please make sure to share it with them. We believe in the power of life-changing information, and it's especially powerful when it's shared from a trusted source. And finally, if you could leave us a comment or make sure to subscribe to the podcast, we would greatly appreciate that. It helps us continue to bring you this life-changing information, and make sure that you get all future podcast updates sent to you. Have a beautiful day, and thank you once again.